everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Love Warriors Working to Build a Better World podcast. I'm your host, Megan, and I am so excited to have our special guest here today. She is somebody who was mentioned in our previous episode, my ever so lovely coworker, Kim DuFour. And we had mentioned her in the episode with Katie Otterly about case management. And so we are excited to have her here today to talk about all things community foundations and disaster response.
Thank you, Megan, for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so Kim, what role do you play here at NVCF?
So here at NVCF, my current role is Director of Strategic Grant Making.
Okay.
And that really kind of rolled from before that I was a program officer. And as a program officer, I helped with our grant making over the last 6 years. And most of that grant making has been disaster related. Mm-hmm. And so I have worked with probably hundreds of different organizations that are somehow working in disaster relief, all kinds of different nonprofits. And so I work with them on their grant applications, on talking to them about funding that they need, helping to make sure that they can do the work that they need to do with our resources, supporting them. A lot of site visits, a lot of work in the community with all the different nonprofits and groups that are helping us with disaster recovery.
I know me and Katie had mentioned that you really are the one kind of on the ground doing the things, which is kind of an unusual role for a community foundation. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask is that NVCF played a really critical role in campfire response. Mm-hmm. And was that a common practice at the time? This was in 2018. Were community foundations stepping into those roles as disaster relief organizations?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I don't believe they really were.
Yeah.
However, I was new to this. My prior life was, at a university, and I had never done any type of disaster work. One of the things I realized as we stepped into, the campfire was such a massive event, and there was so much loss and destruction, and it was pretty much new to all of us here in the community. We learned a lot from other partners that do this day in and day out, like a Red Cross or United Way. And it was not our goal in any way, shape, or form to try to do what they do. In fact, that's one of our goals as a community foundation, was to look at where are the gaps and how can we help. And I think because Campfire was so large, there was not one single organization that could just step forward and say, we got it. So what we really needed to do was kind of be one of the groups that was convening, whether it was nonprofits in areas like case management. We had 10 different groups doing that about a year after Campfire. But it took a long time, a lot of coming together with people kind of trying to figure out who was doing what and where were the gaps and how could we help people.
Which is so cool. One of the themes of this podcast is democratizing philanthropy, and I feel like NVCF as a community foundation has always been sort of pushing the boundaries of how we show up in our community, and I love that. I love that we've been able to occupy that role, and we're kind of a little bit of renegades when it comes to community foundation life, and we're really setting a new pace for community foundations, and I'm so proud of you and all the work you've done, and obviously all the work that we've done in total, but yeah.
It is truly a team effort. And, one of the things that happened with the Campfire is we became the trusted organization because of all the work that was done pre-Campfire that community foundations do all the time with helping donors support their community, helping community with causes. So we were able to take all the good work that was done prior to the fire, and then when a disaster hit, we grew our team from, what did we have prior, 6 people? At 20, we were at our height probably around 22.
Yeah.
But grew our team, and the community, other communities, other donors trusted us with a lot of resources. We raised over $70 million, and our goal was to make sure that money was used in a way that could help best with the recovery of our community. And one of the things we learned is how long that recovery is. Right when it happened, I think there was the expectation of, oh, you have all this money, can you just pass it all out? And yeah, we could have, but it wouldn't have rebuilt homes. It wouldn't have got counselors to kids in schools. We let the partners that do more short-term recovery, like Red Cross. They typically do all their work within the first 2 years of a disaster, and then they move on to the next disaster. And we knew we were in it for the long haul, and we kind of had to set up our funds to help people to understand that we will walk this path with you, and have the resources to help you on this path.
Yeah, which has been definitely, I mean, we're now 6 years out, and Katie was talking about in the last episode, case management, how they're still getting people 6 years later who are, whether they moved away and came back and were negatively impacted in one form or another, and here they are trying to figure out, is there funding for me to, have furniture in my new home, or is there funding to help me get a new home? And she did tell a story that was really heartfelt about a gentleman who got into a new home recently after he had lost his home in the campfire and was living elsewhere, and came back, and he was able to get furniture for his home, and he was so excited. And it really is a long haul. It's not it's not an easy. We're in it. We're here for a while, guys. We're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Exactly. And there's so many groups out there that are really, I didn't realize the number of faith-based organizations, the number of groups that come in and will do rebuilds for you. But all of that, oftentimes those groups need funding. They need funding for staff people. There's no way the rebuild's going to happen without massive amounts of federal and state resources. But somebody has to coordinate that. And I think the sheer red tape for somebody to figure out how to, that may not even have a good internet connection, to figure out how to fill the forms out to, where case managers can bring in 3, 4, 5 different funding sources, and help people actually who are able to rebuild their homes.
Yeah. I love that it's like a collective effort. So it's not just one organization. I think oftentimes we're perceived as the organization that's keeping all of the money, but it really is so many organizations coming together and doing so many different elements. And it takes everybody. It takes a little bit of everyone to show up to the table to do the work. And I love that it's a collaborative team effort.
Yeah, it really is a collaborative team effort. And there are some people that come in right when the disaster happens, and they want to be there for the relief, and that's great. But you need the partners for the long haul too, and it is a really long, complex process.
Yeah.
And then you look at too, it's not just when you lose an entire town, when you lose schools. So people who are coming back, there's a lot of things that are triggering for that. A lot of, it's a long process to see things get rebuilt, trucks coming and going from your town, removing debris, and then coming in and rebuilding. It's just, there's so many different, when I look at our grants, we really had to say what could we do in housing? How much could we do in health and wellness? How you've got to have businesses, but businesses need to have people in the community in order to come back. And so it's like the economic recovery, it's the community recovery. So there's lots of different components that kind of work together. And it's long-term recovery groups that come in and can make a big difference.
Yeah, so much good work happening. So why do you think NVCF did the work? What was the motivation behind stepping into this role?
I think part of it was because we were trusted. We had a system set up for it in order to take in donations, and then also to make sure those donations got used in a manner that made the biggest difference. Yeah. But I think the motivation was community foundations can operate differently. So oftentimes there were things that government can't fund or certain grants can't fund. And so we were able to really kind of leverage our dollars. Like one of the grants we gave out was we hired grant writers for the different municipal groups, the town, the county, the city. And those grant writers then could access federal dollars. And so maybe one position could go access, $20, $30 million in other funding. I think in one of our annual reports, we've discussed that one of our grants that was like maybe a $300,000 grant leveraged like $38 million in other resources. Because you have to realize when a disaster happens, nonprofits and governmental agencies all of a sudden have like kind of their amount of work tripled. Then normally they were already doing good work out in your community. And now all of a sudden something has disrupted that. So they have to help bring everything back at the same time. So sometimes they just need some additional resources, and then we can leverage those resources. So I think our motivation was oftentimes we can pay for things that other people can't, or it's maybe a little easier to spend our money on, in the beginning, just getting counselors in the schools, because kids had so much trauma. In the burn scar, I believe we lost 8 of the 9 schools. So those kids all of a sudden were coming back to their community, and they were like in, literally like kind of in a warehouse in the beginning. They were in different places. But the positive thing is we realized we could really get to our younger citizens if we worked through the schools. So we spent millions of dollars doing grants to make sure there was support in the schools. And then the schools, after our funding went for multiple years, then they were able to apply for other funding sources. So there's still counselors in schools now, and we're not paying for it anymore. They secured other dollars to make sure that now we always have that.
Oh, that's so cool. I feel like that's one of those, again, things that I think a lot of people don't know about or understand when they're like, what happened to all of the money? It did go to good causes. We promise.
Yes.
Legally, it did have to go to good causes. We have to report that to the IRS, guys. But that's amazing. I think leveraging the idea of leveraging dollars, especially for like municipalities and paying for people on staff like grant writers, is such a wild concept to me as somebody who was really unfamiliar with the world of philanthropy in general when I first started here 6 years ago, right after the campfire. It was such an interesting thought of like, hey, if we spend, $100,000 here, we could bring in 30 million, which is crazy to think about, but also really exciting. It's one of those things that, again, it gets lost in the shuffle of publicity because it's not a cool thing that you're like, oh, hey, look at this beautiful story of like, we put, $10,000 in somebody's hand, like you see on a lot of those like social media platforms, people going out and helping homeless people and giving them money. And, those are amazingly beautiful feel-good stories, and you love to see things like that. But at the same time, how cool to be able to be the people doing the underground work to make something as awesome as like a $30 million federal grant coming in happen. That's so cool. Yeah. You're doing good work.
Well, we're lucky to be able to do it. And it's really the boots on the ground out there. It's the other people out there doing the hard stuff. We kind of get to do the show us the great program that you're doing, and we'll help fund that.
Yeah, we do. So, we do have pretty cool jobs. Yeah. So there have been 4 large wildfires in our rural area, as my dad recall, who was a retired firefighter. There have been 4 large wildfires, and that's just since the campfire. And each one of those has burned multiple homes, caused extreme damage. And with that being said, do you think NVCF has improved its wildfire response? Was the campfire the catalyst that just put us into this position? And with each fire, do you feel like we get better and better, or we're learning things?
I think with each disaster, we're getting better and better. Like we stepped up with COVID. We have helped with winter storms and with fires, because now we know who the players are. And now we know who the trusted partners are out in the field. So when something does happen, we know which organizations can support the community. I think one of the things you see, especially in some of the other fires that have happened, the Bear Fire, the Dixie Fire, the Park Fire, is you do see inequity in fires. And with that, I mean that based on, with the Camp Fire, I think it was such a large fire. I don't think we had that kind of destruction in the past. Granted, there's been some huge ones, what just happened in Southern California, the Maui fires, the Marshall Fire in Boulder. There's been some other ones since Camp Fire, but I think the devastation was so large with the Camp Fire, the amount of money we raised was kind of off the charts. And I don't think that's ever going to happen again. Yeah. Never say never, but I think there's probably a little bit of disaster fatigue out there. At that point, it was November too. I don't think people expected that there was going to be a fire like that in November. But we were able to just raise this incredible amount of resources, where in other fires, like the Bear Fire is a perfect example, we raised a couple million, which actually was wonderful that we were able to raise that much money. But for those survivors, we didn't have the same type of resources that we had for the other disasters. The other thing that was different with the Camp Fire is when fires are caused by an entity, like a utility company, then you get this whole different layer of complexity with lawsuits and other money coming in that isn't there when it's a lightning-caused fire. So literally, people up in certain areas in our community, like Berry Creek, after the Bear Fire, were much more limited in their resources because it was not a utility-caused fire. Same thing when we look at the Park Fire, which is the fire that we had this summer. It wasn't large enough. I think it's like 800. A certain amount of structures have to burn before you get that FEMA declaration. I have learned so much stuff that I didn't even probably need to know in my life. Like how many homes do you have to lose to be disaster, get FEMA designation. But FEMA designation brings in other resources like case management and can bring other funding in with it. And so you have a fire like the Park Fire that never got the FEMA declaration. Terrible fire, hundreds and, I think 500 structures lost, 500 homes lost. Very limited resources to help those survivors. And so there's definitely it's not an equitable process. The other thing is when you look at areas like today we were on a call with some folks from the Marshall Fire in Boulder. When you have fires that hit areas that are maybe new builds, I think you might have more people who have insurance. They have to carry insurance because they have a mortgage on their home. Whereas what we had up in Paradise and Magalia and these areas, you had people who did everything the right way. They bought their home. They paid for it. They didn't have a mortgage any longer on the home. They had retired. They were living this perfect life in an area they loved, and maybe living on retirement and Social Security, very limited income. Couldn't afford the high cost of insurance, but we're like, okay, my home's paid for. I can get by. And then they lose their home, and, it's for somebody who's worked their whole life to be in a secure housing situation and just lose it overnight. It's
tragic.
It's very tragic and very hard in that recovery process. Yeah. So it's just been interesting to see, and based on location and area. And up in the Dixie Fire, one of the issues is getting builders to go up there. Yeah. It's in Plumas County, it's more remote. The other thing is you can't work all year long. Yeah. You can't build through the winter. And so then you've got this 6-month window where, let's build it now. And so for a lot of our fire-affected communities, their location really makes a difference on how quickly they're going to see recovery.
I think that's a very nuanced perspective on multiple disasters in one area. Like I keep thinking of the Eaton fire versus the Palisades fire down in LA that recently happened, and thinking through the inequities of just the amount of money that specific populations had versus the other. That's not to say that everyone in the Palisades, had more money or more fire insurance than everybody in Altadena, but some of it can be comparable, and I'm curious to see how that will end up affecting how those communities are able to rebuild. And I have hope that there's going to be enough organizations there and there's enough people doing the work that it'll be a much more equitable process. I think it's not hard, but I think it's different for us here in the North State because we are such a small community. Geographically, we're large, but population-wise, we're pretty tiny.
Yeah.
And the infrastructure we have is very small, and like you had said, it's hard to get builders out to like Greenville because it is kind of a more rural place than somewhere like the Palisades in Los Angeles. So it's interesting to see the differences between how response happens in different communities. It's also a beautiful thing to get to witness because, your communities are, the phrase is forged by fire. And I think that's a kind of a blatant statement, but I think it's so true that you really step into these spaces with your community that you may have never had to step into before. You become dependent upon them, each other in different ways that you might not have ever experienced before. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out down there. And I have a lot of hope for them. Yeah. And SoCal's my home, so I'm excited to see some positive things come from that. So next question I want to ask is, in your role in disaster response through the Camp Fire, was there anything memorable that really stuck with you, whether it was a survivor story or something we were able to accomplish, something you were able to accomplish?
I think kind of what stuck with me is the incredible people I've gotten to work with. Because I think back on every disaster I've worked on, and in the end, it's been this core group. The group's a little bit different based on the community, but there's really champions in each community. These people that just seem to have a boundless amount of energy that really, I'm not going to name names, but you know who you are out there. And it's funny when you come to a community for the first time, like when we started working up in Greenville for the Dixie Fire, first couple times I'd see people, on calls or meet people, then you realize, okay, the same names kind of come up. And there's definitely champions in each one of these communities that some of them were there before, but some of them just kind of rose from that disaster. And to see how they support their community for the long haul, I've met some incredible people that I'm really proud to now call friends. And it's just great to see that basically people do care and they want to make a difference and they want to help.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. It really is a cool experience to witness on the back end of like this just beautiful collaboration of individuals coming together and how much impact they can have and over time. And it's interesting because roles change and people change and the people come and go, but there's just these people that are just pure champions regardless of what role they're in or where they're at, and they're constantly supporting and constantly striving to see positive growth and change happen. And I'm grateful to get to experience that as a community member. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Okay, so I have one more question for you.
Okay.
And this is more of a broader question for, I think, our Community Foundation audience. Obviously, this podcast is focused on a broader audience of kind of anybody and everybody, as our goal and mission is to democratize philanthropy. But one question I wanted to ask is, as wildfires become more and more common throughout the country and beyond, what role do you think community foundations have the potential or opportunity to fill in the world of disaster response?
I think community foundations are uniquely poised to be ready when disasters happen, whether it's wildfires, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, whatever it is, these things are going to happen. And we know they're becoming more and more catastrophic, or I don't know, they're really impacting our communities. And so I think for community foundations to be prepared in pulling people together, holding funds, having a process for supporting those funds, having a process for knowing that this is going to, most recoveries from any disaster are going to be long-term, and you're the community foundation, and so you're in it for the long term, and you can really be the catalyst in the community. There is a lot of talk out there now about resilience, but also long-term recovery. And I think for community foundations to have kind of a plan and to move quickly when things happen, but then to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about NVCF in 2025 now is our ability to respond quickly. Thank you, Kim.
Yes.
This has been a great episode.
I've loved it. I've really enjoyed it.
You are so good at your job.
Yeah, so are you. So it's wonderful to work together.
You definitely care so much about this community, and we're so lucky to have you. And I know even in my personal experience, you've been somebody that I'm always like, I want to be like Kim when I grow up.
You're so sweet.
Since the first day I met you, I was like, man, she's doing so many things, and you just made so many things happen for so many people. And that's awesome.
Privileged to be able to help.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in today. We are so excited to see you next time. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And we'll see you next time.